Hello, my name is Barbara Lucas and welcome to The Green Room, a collaboration between Washtenaw County and Ann Arbor's Community Television Network. Our guest today is Crystal Campbell, the Program and Communication Manager for Washtenaw County's Racial Equity Office. Crystal, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So to get started, what is the Racial Equity Office?
That is a great question. We get that one a lot. So the Racial Equity Office came from an initiative in a resolution from the Board of Commissioners in 2018. So the office is a little new, but it is our job to help alleviate equity-based disparities in Washtenaw County. And so it's our job to ensure that folks will have equal opportunity to health, wellness, education, entertainment.
Okay. Who is our first Racial Equity Officer?
Yes, so Elise Asbury Payne is the first Racial Equity Officer here in Washtenaw County. I work directly for her. She helps to set the strategic direction for the Racial Equity Office and ensure that all of our initiatives and programs are executed, assessed, and are effective.
Great. Well, I'm sure your office covers a whole lot of different goals and objectives, so we're not going to be able to go through all of them today. But since the Green Room is an environmentally focused show, let's kind of focus a little bit on environmental justice. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take just a second to run through, for context, some things I read this morning on the environmental justice movement. It's the 30th anniversary of the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And they drafted 17 principles of environmental justice. Back then, there was growing awareness of the disproportionate impacts of pollution to people of color. So lately, it seems like we're having a better understanding of why this is so. And the word institutionalized racism seems to be coming up a whole lot. And I wondered if you could address that and how it differs from individual racism, for instance.
Certainly. So while individual racism is the negative thoughts or feelings that individuals have towards folks of a different race, paired with their actions towards other individuals of a different race, sometimes we hear it as discrimination. That is on an individual basis. Institutional racism is really when those same folks who are driving and leaders and serving inside of organizations and institutions enact policies, procedures, and practices that have a negative impact, a systemic impact on the livelihoods of people of color.
Yeah, and I come across this quote, which is pretty illustrative. I think it says, "Neither your race nor your zip code should determine your chances in life." And I found that on the website opportunitywashtenaw.org. So what is meant by that phrase?
So in 2014 and 2015, the county really undertook an effort to examine the data here in Washtenaw County, to look at where a person lives, what a person's race is, what a person's other demographic identifiers are, and how they impact the length of their life, their health outcomes, their economic and educational status. And they discovered in the data that there are glaring disparities between certain zip codes, and it's quantitative. It is measurable that Black people and people of color in Washtenaw County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in Michigan, one of the most educated counties in the nation, that Black people and people of color living in specific zip codes do have negative health outcomes as a result of the systems that we interact with on a daily basis. And so that quote is sort of a vision statement of where we would rather be, where we can work towards. We want to work towards a county where you lived does not matter, where what your race is does not matter, that everyone has an equal opportunity to resources, into a quality of life that will ensure that they have a long and fruitful and healthy life.
Yeah, some of those statistics are just, amazing. I read that Black babies in Washtenaw County are twice as likely to be born at a low birth weight as white babies, and 6 times more likely to grow up in poverty.
And that was in 2015. That wasn't in 2020 or 2021. So imagine what it must look like now with the COVID-19 pandemic, exasperating those disparities.
Oh yeah, yep, for sure. So let's talk about the impact of institutionalized racism on land use and home ownership. I've heard that there still exists some racial covenants and deeds in Washtenaw County.
Yeah, so there's a study happening at the University of Michigan. It's being driven by the Realtors Association because there are dozens of neighborhoods in Washtenaw County wherein deeds have language written into them that prevented homeowners from selling their land and property and houses to Black people and to people of color. Um, and so it's definitely an example of institutional racism because these things have prevented Black people and people of color from being able to earn and attain equity in homes, which, you know, it kind of has a domino effect, right? In 1940 or 1950, you couldn't buy a home in a certain area, which means wherever you did buy a home didn't gain value like those all white neighborhoods did, which means maybe you couldn't put your kids through college, right? Or you couldn't buy a first home for your children when they became of age. These are kind of, granular and specific examples, but those covenants were not uncommon. Washtenaw County was not the only one that had them. Ann Arbor was not the only one that had them. And that language is still included in a lot of the contracts. It's not enforceable, and they are not enforced, but they have been a driving force between the economic disparity between white people and Black people and people of color in Washtenaw County. And so I really appreciate that the University of Michigan and the realtors in the area are, one, bringing light to it, and then two, striking that language from the covenants and taking steps to rectify the damage and harm that was caused for so many years.
Yeah, it's really shocking. I read that it says people are still getting in their contracts, no part of this land shall be occupied by persons not of the Caucasian race except as guests or servants.
Exactly.
Oh my God, it's just...
Exactly. So the help can come visit. You know, your friends or relatives can come visit, but they can't buy here. They can't live. They can't be a part of your community. They can't earn wealth based on real estate.
Yeah, and if they can't build wealth, they may end up in neighborhoods that may not be ideal for many reasons. And what are some of the impacts that could occur because someone lives near a polluting industry?
Certainly. Well, some of those outcomes means that we'll see higher and have seen higher rates of asthma in young people, that there's not as much green space in that area, that there are pollutants that may affect the groundwater, that affect the air quality. We often see neighborhoods of color and Black neighborhoods close to expressways. Imagine what the air quality would be if your house or townhouse or apartment backs up to I-94. And so there are those are some very direct outcomes, right? Or maybe the neighborhood that you live in was built on top of an old landfill or an old area where, you know, we used to put waste because the land was cheap. So a developer purchased the land, sells the land to folks who don't qualify to live in more affluent areas. But the long-term effects can affect health. They can affect the land values and the value of the neighborhoods. And so it really just compounds conditions for Black and brown people in those areas.
Yeah, I've heard like the soil can even be contaminated. Yep. Like in Detroit, they were, trying to do all that urban gardening and worrying about, I don't know, lead or different contaminants in the soil getting into the plants. And that can be a real sustainability issue.
Certainly.
And speaking of which, I'm reminded of fishing for either recreation or sustenance. And with the water, a lot of places in Washtenaw County, you can't eat a lot of the species of fish.
This is true. I know that Fort Lake has been under a do not eat order for at least 18 months. So you can fish for recreation, which is a privilege, but you can't necessarily eat what you're pulling from the lake because of algae blooms or other types of pollutants that may be in the water. Poor people have to find ways to eat. And I don't honestly believe that a do not eat order is going to prevent a family that needs that food to survive from taking the chance of eating fish that they might pull from a water source that is knowingly polluted.
Before the show, you told me that the role of your office, one of them, is to ask a different set of questions. So in terms of some of the environmental issues that we have in the county, what would be some of the questions? For instance, when it comes to siting a new pipeline or a new factory or a new highway, what would the questions be?
So when it comes to that kind of development, I think it's really important to have a robust community engagement process. Institutional racism, systemic racism says that a lot of times systems make decisions for people and then people bear the brunt of the consequences of those decisions. So the questions that we ask ahead of time before development like that comes into an area is to engage with the neighborhood, engage with the community, and find out ahead of time what it is that they want to see, what it is that they need, uh, and how these developments can impact the long-term impact that community. I think we have to ask questions like, who is at the decision-making table? Who sits on the planning commission at the various local municipalities? Who sits on particularly the county's Brownfield Development Authority that determines what will happen to commercial properties that have been deemed, polluted? And so if we put people at the table that have a vested stake in the outcomes, if we ask who's not here, who will be impacted and who's not here, and let's make sure that they're at the table, not just to voice their concerns, but to help make decisions, then we can, over the long term, ensure that our decisions are beneficial to everyone in the community.
It reminds me of several of the principles of the environmental justice movement, include self-determination.
Yeah, yep.
Right.
Kujichagulia even. Self-determined, Kujichagulia. One of the principles of Kwanzaa is Kujichagulia, which is a Swahili word. It translates to self-determination. It's the ability to make decisions for yourself, for your own life, for your own community, for your own family. Yes, self-determination, I would argue, is probably one of the driving forces, not only behind racial equity, but behind the fight for equality in this country for decades.
And what are the logistics of getting more people of color on these commissions and nonprofit environmental organizations or things like that?
I think it's about awareness. I think a lot of times systems will use traditional means for doing call outs or, there's for advertising openings. We have to make a concerted effort to go to where the people are. So that means engaging with the faith community. That means engaging with organizations that service low-income populations. That means going to neighborhood watch groups. That means, it means finding folks where they are. That means going to ethnic grocery stores, right? That means engaging with resettlement organizations. That means talking to folks who are returning citizens. We have to be very creative and very intentional about where we share opportunities for leadership, how we create the pool for where we'll pull members of appointed boards and bodies.
Okay. In terms of we ask a different set of questions, I'm thinking about the 10,000 Trees initiative that the city of Ann Arbor is rolling out. And what would be the kind of questions that you would like to be asking in that respect?
Certainly, and I believe that they are asking some of these questions. Commissioner Shushink, who is the chair of the board for this term, this is something that's really near and dear to her heart. And I think they're thinking about it in the right way, in that we have to look at where the trees aren't, right? Where aren't the trees? Where's the canopy lower than other areas? Which neighborhoods, which communities could benefit most from this planting? Not necessarily today, but 20 years from now, right?
Absolutely. Trees filter pollutants. Let's see, what else do trees do? The urban heat, what is that? The heat
Urban heat effect, well, they help to cool, right? Because a lot of urban areas, a lot of places where there's more condensed living space, is cement and concrete, right? There are not a lot of green spaces. There are not a lot of trees. And so trees help to cool areas, which is why it's so beautiful, right? To walk through a county park, or so beautiful to walk through certain neighborhoods adjacent to downtown, because that tree canopy helps to keep the temperature comfortable. It helps to keep the pollutants out of that particular area. And a lot of urban neighborhoods just don't have that, and not necessarily by accident.
Yeah, I was looking on Google Earth, and there's some neighborhoods that are very treeless. And then you go to the Ann Arbor side, which is similarly distant from the downtown area, and the tree canopy is just amazing.
It's Ann Arbor.
Yeah, it's very different.
Trees are amazing, right? They need us and we need them. And so I'm happy about this tree effort, and I'm really hoping that the trees get to where they can make the greatest impact.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of bringing things to these communities, you mentioned before the interview about bringing fresh food to people. Do you want to address that?
Certainly. So we know, if not just by driving through, then by the data that we collect, that there are areas in the county that are food deserts. It's not only Black and brown areas. There are lots of part of our rural area in Washtenaw County that are food deserts. There is no grocery store. I know that the Food Policy Council, which is another committee, another board that is appointed by the Board of Commissioners, is doing some really important work around food access. They work very closely with food gatherers. They have a framework that is getting fresh and healthy foods to areas that don't necessarily have them. That comes in the form of like markets that they bring to specific neighborhoods. There are lots of nonprofit organizations like Growing Hope who go around to specific neighborhoods and teach residents how to grow their own food. And they do this service free of charge. And so there are strategies that are being implemented to try to account for the fact that there are so many food deserts in Washtenaw County. And the Racial Equity Office is really just trying to support those efforts in whatever way that we can.
Great. Yeah, and it's compounded by if you don't have a car, which is another environmental issue. You know, we're trying to get more transit so that we have less emissions from one person per car families. And we need better infrastructure, right, for people to be able to, you know, not only transit, but if they choose to walk or ride a bike. So that's wrapped up into the environmental goals of the Washtenaw County as well.
They are. Regional transit has been a priority of the Board of Commissioners for the last couple of terms. AAATA is also working towards making sure that folks have safe and reliable bus access. We know we have so many different ride share programs that are available for people to use. Some things that I know that are coming. There's a huge project from the Michigan Department of Transportation that will help to make Huron Street more walkable. Huron Street is the border between Ypsilanti Township and the city of Ypsilanti. And right now it's very dangerous for folks to walk over I-94. And so that's something that the community saw, and the community knew that it was a need. And they went into talks with the Michigan Department of Transportation, the Washtenaw County Road Commission, the various municipalities that are adjacent to that area. And there's a huge project coming to make that area walkable, because guess where the grocery store is? The grocery store is in Ypsilanti Township. And residents of Ypsilanti need access to that grocery store, and they don't necessarily have to walk there. So there's a bus stop there. There's a super bus stop there now that AAATA has put in, and MDOT, along with the Road Commission, Ypsi City and Ypsi Township, are building a crosswalk, a walkable space so that folks from the city can get to Ypsi Township, especially for the purpose of accessing that grocery store.
That's great. Yeah, it reminds me of one time I was trying to cross Michigan in Ypsilanti, and there were no crosswalks, not for a really long time. And I had a sore knee. So I thought, okay, I'll just cross here. I don't see any cars coming. But a car came zooming out of nowhere, and he saw me trying to cross the road. And I think he thought, oh, well, she's able-bodied. She's going to be able to get across fast. So he didn't slow down. And I was like, you know, trying really hard to get across the street. It's another example of why we need crosswalks. Not everybody can dash.
Right. Run and breakneck spree like Frogger to try and get across a major thoroughfare. Yeah, and so I know of several projects as well that are targeted in order to not just build in crosswalks on major streets, but to also include sidewalks. You know, there was a project in a previous role that I had where they mapped out every single location in this municipality where there were sidewalks and where there weren't. And so the goal is to fill in those gaps. They'll find federal funds, they'll find state funds to fund those projects to make it more accessible and walkable, not just for people of color, not just for folks who don't want to get into their, you know, single-use vehicle and drive, but for people who may have disabilities, people who are maybe wheelchair bound or using devices to assist them in their transportation. And so, yeah, filling in those sidewalks, making sure that we have those accessible crosswalks, making sure that it's safe to navigate over freeways, right? These are all things that might not necessarily seem like equity related issues, that may not seem like environmental issues, but they are because they stack on top of each other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears a little bit, I know that climate change is also a priority for your office. Why is that?
I think our big thing, our big push, and the reason this is a priority for us right now is because the Board of Commissioners understands that climate change is like not a fallacy. It's very real. And the county can and must do something now. We must take concrete action now. And so it's a priority for the Board of Commissioners. It is a priority for the Environmental Council. It's a priority for the Racial Equity Office. And so I think that's really the point that I want to drive home.
So why is it a point for the Racial Equity Office?
We only have one planet and we all have to live in it, right? And so it's a priority for us because we want to make sure that those that are most marginalized, those who have historically had the least amount of opportunities and the least access to resources, have a voice in these talks and these efforts, and will also benefit from the strategies and benefit from the outcomes that we're all hoping for.
This has been really valuable, Crystal. I really appreciate your time here today.
And I appreciate you for reaching out. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
For this and all our previous shows, go to washtenaw.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us here in the green room.